everyone, and welcome to a very, very special show, a very special Lighthouse Live. Today, it's a bit different. We talk a lot in this show about what AI can do, what it creates and what it replaces, and how fast everything moves. But there's a conversation that we don't have nearly enough. What all of this is creating to people that live inside it. The creators, the leaders, the one who are building in public every day. And we're all terrified of missing a model drop of a new workflow that we don't test. And today's guest is someone who's been brave enough to go inward in an industry that rewards only going outward. Masha Tihel, welcome to Lighthouse Live. I'm genuinely glad that you're here.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here as well. I think it's a very important conversation we need to have.
It is. And I want to start with something that you went through recently, and a lot of people as well, me included. It's about burnout. So can you tell me about, you told me on a pre-call that you went on a vacation for a month. And what was the moment when you said, okay, I'm stopping right now? What broke, or what finally got clear enough?
It wasn't an option. At that point, it wasn't a questionable thing anymore. It was just a required thing to do. And I kind of struggled with taking time off for a lot of the time. And it's like I tried to draw parallels with machines because that's ironically something that I can most relate to. And it's like even a computer has to be rebooted with great updates installed, or when it gets overheating, you just kind of have to shut it off for a while and step away for a second. But what's the irony is that getting to that stop is seemingly the most difficult thing, but far from it. It's actually the easiest thing you're going to have to do. Because once you stop and you have that 1 week of, let's say, rejuvenation, binge watching, sleeping in, doing the things you've always said you're going to do on your vacation, but you don't, then you're left by yourself. And then you just have to kind of go through another challenge, which is learning how to rest, teaching yourself how to take that time off and not be on constantly. Because what happens to me, I try not to, but it still does, is once my brain slows down and it's not backed up by all of the tasks that I have to do, it starts to become creative and new ideas come up and new projects get designed and completely new directions kind of take shape and take form. And then I'm already planning ahead, and it's like, what are we doing again, right?
But you said that stop, you have to stop. And when we do stop, there's always that feeling that you're missing out on something, because the pace that everything is moving forward, that, like I said, the new workflows, the new models, the new things that we have to test, you have a feeling that you are lagging behind. And the FOMO, or the fear of missing out, is quite huge, especially in AI landscape.
Yeah.
So what is actually happening in brain when we have this fear of missing out? How do we start to not care?
The not caring part is something that most of us go to as a beginning stage of how to address this issue, right? But it's actually the most difficult route of doing it. A more productive way is actually asking yourself, why are you so afraid you'll be forgotten or left out or all of a sudden become irrelevant? You're a creative, right? You've been building your skills up for X amount of years, developed your experiences, you have your own unique perspective, which every human has, right? We all have our own little niches of specialties and our own little hobbies that kind of expand on that. So a new model won't just take that away by default, right? What's kind of humming in the background here is essentially a really deep worth wound that's connected to probably our past even before we decided for the professional direction that we have, which is, if I'm not constantly there, if I'm not constantly in the loop, I will be made redundant. I will be forgotten, right? And AI actually really plays onto those buttons directly, and it hits the core of the issue. Because it's so fast, because it's so innovative, because it's so show-offy, especially when we talk about creative outputs, right? And it paints this picture all over LinkedIn, the new social media, which is making you feel like you're wasting your time by taking the time off. Whereas nobody wants to look at, how deep are those stories? How developed are those characters? How refined are those storyboards or those campaigns that they were created? Was it just play, research, or was it actual, sorry, or was it just actual, intent and purpose and a message behind it? Because that's something that's very distinguishable. And I think we can all, as humans, pick up on that as we perceive that content. It's very different, right? Yeah, there's pretty pictures, but then there's things that resonate with us. Recently, I had contact with Lighthouse students, and I was at the final project showcase, and there was this one project that really stood out. And it touched upon a very unpleasant topic of safety in schools. But the way it was done, the way it took shape, the way the visuals kind of, illustrated the problem that kids are facing at schools all of a sudden in the modern world, it really touched on something deep within. And that's something that you can get to if you stop and really fine tune your craft and start developing your own voice, which is what previous tools kind of gave us the luxury of, because development was much more slowed down. So you had 10, 15 years to master Photoshop and co-develop your niche perspective, your flavor of creatives, right? Now it's, new models every week, new platforms every day, new APIs, new plugins constantly. And you want to try them out, but what ends up happening is you're stuck on the superficial level of trying them out. You don't apply them to your unique creative.
So actually stopping really helps you because lately there are debates that, yeah, tools are awesome and the progression is amazing and it's a bit overwhelming. But what it actually matters, it's not how to use tools, but how to think and in a combination of using. And this is what we've been doing in Lighthouse in the last cohort. We went from tools only to human centric. And we started teaching about how to think, about art direction, about things that actually are not connected with AI tools as much as the traditional concepts. So stopping for a bit and refocusing on fundamentals is actually much, much better for you. So
It's, yeah,
yeah.
it's counterintuitive, but it's way more productive at the end of the day. Because something we need to realize here is, and something I hear a lot with people I work with as well, is how do I control the slot machine, right? And it's precisely that. It's feeding the addiction. And what we do when we pursue wanting to try everything and being constantly in the loops and on all the Reddits and keeping up with all the YouTube tutorials and liking all the LinkedIn posts and seeing it all, we're actually dopamine training our brain. And I'd like to talk about this a little bit more because I think there's a lot of misconception when it comes to dopamine and how we see it, because most of the people just defined it as the hormone of joy. But it's not. It's a pleasure chemical, yeah, but it doesn't make you feel good when you succeed. It's actually an anticipation chemical. It's the engine, it's not the end goal, right? And it spikes when you expect that reward, when you wait for the model to generate what you've just prompted, right? Especially when it's uncertain. And that's why we crave things more than we enjoy them once we have them, right? And once you get that image, it's like, it's not perfect. Yeah. And the result is that this creates the chase loop. So we're biologically wired to be the hunters of the next hit.
So
To put it bluntly, we're organic junkies, right?
there, you said
And
it.
rather than being satisfied dwellers in the current moment and actually look at it, okay, how can I, let's say, upscale this using my own two hands, not another model, not another plugin, right? And specifically, since I've been working with a lot of creatives, I've noticed that people started optimizing their rest and kind of like proving that their brains were still trapped in this chase, still trying to stay ahead, even when they said, well, I spent the entire weekend on the couch.
Yeah. Yeah. Well put. You once said something that really stuck with me. That there's a difference between learning because you're curious and learning because you're terrified. So when did you notice you were on the wrong side of that line?
Whenever I pivoted in my career, and there has been quite a few turns, because it's like you're stepping into a new territory, right? And looking at the beginning of our lives, how do we start stepping into new territory? It's going through school and getting the diploma, getting the certification. That makes you feel like, hey, I have the ticket to have the seat at the table. But isn't that ironic? All we have at that moment is theory, no practice, no practical examples, no plastic knowledge. Theory takes you quite a bit of a stretch, don't get me wrong, and I'm a learning supporter, absolutely. But there's a thing to say as to how you've acquired that knowledge. Is it through learning or is it through reading? That makes two completely distinctive experiences. And this is something that I call the panic learning trap, which is you try to get the certifications, you want to enroll into all of the courses, you want to be proficient in all of the tools, and that takes all of your bandwidth, but it doesn't give you enough headspace or just time to actually see, this paintbrush actually works best for me. I like how it strokes. I like how I play with it. I like what paintings I make with it, instead of I need to try all of the possible paintbrushes there are in the world, right?
Yes, but those paintbrushes keep coming. They're new and shiny and better, and there's no time in testing all of them to see which one fits you best.
Precisely. That's why stopping and seeing where you want to be and taking hold of that space, and then pursuing a limited amount of the tools or platforms that fit into that space, instead of you trying to fit into all of the spaces. Because what ends up is you're going to overstretch and break.
Mm.
and you're not going to create possibilities for yourself. You'll constantly be chasing the next dopamine hit, you know?
Exactly.
It becomes kind of like a hopeless pursuit when you start oversaturating the trainings and the workshops, as I said, and having this idea that the certifications will somehow give you that inner confidence. Nothing can. Only we can build it from within.
From inside, yeah.
Yeah, no external tool, no external diploma will give you that. Of course, we still live in a world that's kind of fetishizing some certifications and glamorizing them beyond what I feel is appropriate. And that's still great to do. But the purpose, your why, is important there, right? So why are you deciding to choose to take part in a specific course, or attending a workshop, or watching a tutorial and playing around with the tool? How does that benefit you? How does that fit into, your paintbrush roll, instead of how many paintbrushes can I fit into my paintbrush roll?
So last week I was scheduled Zach London for our Lighthouse Live. He unfortunately had some other plans. But on our pre-call, he said that he's not engaging on conferences. He's not engaging in social media. I mean, of course, he's publishing everything in social media, of course. But he doesn't read comments. He doesn't engage. Yeah. But I know a lot of people who do. And it's actually driving them to create more. So on one hand, it feeds their productivity, but on the other hand, they're chasing those likes, they're chasing those comments, they're chasing those viral moments. So there's always two sides of this, right? So it's the external validation, might not be bad thing because it 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 makes us more productive.
True, but it shouldn't oversaturate, and it shouldn't be the only purpose, which unfortunately happens too often, Some people also just attend conferences, workshops, speeches, debates, hang around the circles of top tier AI creative people right now, and that's their content. There's no creative project behind it. There's this saying, some of the people that can't do teach, and vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's pretty pertinent in this case, right?
So I mean, I've been in AI landscape, I won't say since the very beginning because I didn't start in the 70s, but with most of AI creatives that I engage with, we all started in 22. You started a bit later with, I mean, of course, there had been some tools powered by AI, but those tools that we use nowadays every day, right? You started a bit later. And so how would you, and you learned a lot in the last couple of year or two, yes?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I did LLM research since the beginning because it kind of coincide with my linguistics background. But just Gen AI, yeah, the last 2 years.
Yeah. So when you're describing to someone the AI landscape completely out of it, right? Parent, a friend, what do you say it actually does to people?
I think it forces the high performance into a very stark choice. It's either you double down into the constraints of the model and submit and comply to protect that perceived worth they've been playing around with the most recent and the most shiniest model, or they actively rebel against it. And the downside is that they justify it then. Well, yes, I'll just shoot a shot here. I did use Dance, but then I took it out and I've kind of finished the creative in my old workflow, or I still had to use some Maya for the 3D modeling stuff. And it's like, awesome. That's why these tools are here for, you know? But it feels like from their side, it's like it's a justification and an attempt to make themselves smaller because they weren't able to do it all with just prompting. But that's not the end goal here now, is it?
Correct. You have a couple of really good articles on Substack.
Thank you.
Definitely check out her Substack. It's really well put, well written. And you talk a lot about worth wound.
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain what's worth wound and how does AI specifically activate that wound in the ways that, let's say, a normal corporate or traditional job doesn't?
Both of them do, actually, just in a different capacity, I think. So some of us are leaders, some of us are team players, but when we step onto the professional sphere, our jobs, our teams, our professional tools become a significant part of our identity. And what's also currently shifting is that we're starting to see it as a collective problem, right? So a lot of the companies, especially in Europe, are still kind of archaic in that view, where they place a lot of responsibility on separating, the responsibility from being yourself and having the time off for yourself and have your own life, and working overtime and being there whenever they want you to. They place it on the individual, right? But it ends up costing companies a lot of money. Employee retention is also a problem, right? And the turnover is also a problem. And it's like AI just pushed the pedal to the metal on that, I think. And it changed how we work in that landscape a little bit. It acts as a constant high-speed attack on the belief that your value is inherent. In a traditional job, you had a bit more time. You have a bit more time to build that kind of like professional firewall. Let's say you build a bit more personal connections with some of your suppliers, or some of the clients only want to work with you, and that gives you that boost of confidence, right? But with AI, the model doesn't care who it interacts with.
Yeah, and our brain wasn't built for that pace of development because we are just not made for this.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
and that
go on. Go ahead.
that pace it just directly validates that inner saboteur and boosts the worst fear that we have. So if you're not constantly outputting something and being productive, you're going to be forgotten.
Yeah, I also want to speak about this, about staying relevant, the feeling of staying relevant, because we think that if we won't keep producing, keep outputting, keep developing, keep, building, that we will be forgotten, completely forgotten, and no one will care about us. How does that work? Why is this such a prevalent thing in AI industry?
I think it speaks to the creative part of our souls, right? And I think when you have that calling to speak through visual art, whatever form it may take, there's a silent purpose of you having that painting, that monument, that campaign resonate even after you're gone. Well, we will all be forgotten at one point. We're all on the same train, right?
Yes.
But as creatives, I think the purpose quickly becomes to create stuff that won't be forgotten, which brings me to the irony of things. So we try to pursue each and every tool in an effort to not be forgotten, instead of investing our time, our efforts, and our creative, our piece of the brain, our piece of the soul, our piece of the heart into pieces that will resonate and won't be forgotten. It's a learning curve that we're kind of going through, and I think we're at the peak of it almost, until things stabilize a little bit. And I'm not saying the tech development will slow down by far, but the way we adopt it and the way we use it will solidify a little bit, because its purpose is to aid us instead of take over, which is what most of the creatives fear. And there's also a thing to say, and not to be ageist here, but there's a thing to say about the generations that we have in the creative sphere. So being a millennial and having the idea that I'll be forgotten or replaced is something that we've grown up with, you know. Gen Xers had a bit of a different luxury. There was stability of jobs. There were, you know, agencies, studios. The farther back we go, the longer the periods of stability were, right? And I think there's also a stress added to comparing yourself to a younger generation that had a completely different neuroplasticity journey just growing up, adopting, you know, new tools from age 3 to age 10. It's completely different. It creates a completely different mindset than starting to play with your tools at age 18, 20, 25.
So that's similar to expecting that when the 70-year-old person gets a smartphone and doesn't know anything about it, we expect them to use them as well as people who've been using it for a very long time.
For example, but that doesn't exclude the possibility of them beating you in Roblox, for example. You know what I mean?
You mentioned inner saboteur. I know that practically everyone that I know in AI landscape has it. How to talk to inner saboteur? How to shut him off? Is it possible to shut him off? Do we embrace it? What do we do with it? Not to transform it into something that slowly destroys us.
I think it starts off with just admitting that it's there. A really good technique I also present to a lot of the people that I work with is giving it an identity and embracing that it's going to be a companion on the road with you. Because I don't think there's ever a possibility to shut it off. That's just the dark side of our ego. That's a core element of our identity. It's there. I think the key and the best way forward is to learn how to navigate it and to discern it from reality. So building up on the skill of identifying when it turns on, when it pops up on your shoulder, and then also connected that identity that you built around it to say, hey, Mackenzie, thanks for popping in. I hear you, but I don't need you right now, right? And then taking that step back, because in this way we kind of externalize and itemize what's happening, and we give ourselves the opportunity to actually take a step back and observe those negative thoughts from a perspective that would have been unreachable otherwise. Because To give you a simple example, right? When you're watching somebody else learn something that you've already mastered, right? You very quickly are able to know when they're going to make a classic mistake, and you immediately recall when you did it and how you learned it and what they're feeling right now. So the trick is to try to emulate that same experience, but within yourself.
Mm, yeah. There's something else that you're mentioning in your Substack articles, something called translation fatigue.
Mhm.
Is that a communication problem? Is that a power problem, or just a mental health problem?
It's all and nothing at the same time. No, I'll be very plastic, don't worry. It's essentially a structural power problem that's kind of like disguised as a communication flaw, right? A communication flaw that people have. So it feels like you're living your professional life inside of a house with tinted windows. So you can kind of see the outside world, but you have to like really put in the effort and a lot of invisible labor just to be present and understood by that outside world, because you're encapsulated in this kind of like cloaked house, right? So you're there, you have a function, but you're not fully present or understood. And a lot of creatives are neurodivergent, right? A lot of them are on the spectrum as well. That's what makes us so distinctive. We bring our own particular POV, and we're notorious out of the box thinkers, right? Or even like a highly attuned professional, to veer away from the mental health labels, right? For creatives and for professional creatives, that translation fatigue is kind of like a constant exhausting effort of manually trying to translate something that's native to you. And you always have to use tools, right? But AI kind of broke down that wall and built an impenetrable iron wall. Because seemingly now, even I was never good at drawing, but now I can make fantastic drawings, right? But until I learn how to use that one tool that helps me draw, I still won't be able to translate what I see and hear. And if I disperse that effort into 5 different tools at the same time, there's a level of frustration that I'll reach that brings me to a high level of resentment and also resistance. And that's what we're seeing. A lot of the people have already passed that threshold of trying, even at the enterprise level. Okay, let's do this, let's try. But there's a lack of education that's accompanying that, right? There's a lack of looking at it as a holistic transformation of the way we work, of the way we do things, of the way we create our outputs. It's not just a simple update. That's why we have to be really careful of how we introduce it into creative teams as well, because you're going to have, the enthusiastic adopters, the resistant adopters, the people who have dabbled already on their own. And as a creative leader, you kind of have to navigate between those people facing frustration of learning again, because that hits the ego as well. Whenever we need to learn something new, we're humbled by the fact that what's presented in front of us is making us feel very, very small and taking us back to the school years.
Yeah, and that's why we have so much resistance in let's say traditional industries, such as 3D VFX especially, because people
Mm-hmm.
have learned this craft for decades, and now suddenly, well, we have shifted to, well, not shifted, but we're adding something. then they feel threatened because they need to learn these things to stay relevant.
Mm-hmm.
But it worked for them for decades. But now it's, well, a kid in their parents' basement can create something that they have been doing for so long time, learning all those new things, perfecting their craft. And now you can get it out in 5 minutes. And everyone can, well, not everyone, of course not. But you can get this with a lot less effort. And it's devastating to those people.
Yeah, because it creates a level of this is something that not a lot of people want to talk about, right? But it does create a level of envy. Seeing what the younger generations have available right now, seemingly on the backs of our work, right? They can achieve those things because they have something to model it against, because they have the technology that enables them to do so. You at 20 didn't have that opportunity, and it creates a level of resentment, and also it devalues everything that you've been building on, or at least it creates the feeling that it's devalued. But that's the evolution. The younger generations should be able to step on the backs of our works, should be able to benefit from the fruits of our labor, instead of going through the same difficult journey with the clunky technology that you and I grew up with, and navigating that.
I've read some time ago, I don't know where, but that the age of AI, that who will flourish in the age of AI? And they said people with ADHD and on autism spectrum.
Yeah.
Why is that?
If we look at the more granular nature of tools, right? I'll just take the very simplest one. So Weavy or Figma Weave, a nodular platform that you have. It connects different modalities of expression. You have text, you have image, you have video, you have sound, and it also connects different problem-solving techniques, and it packages it all into one task. And for a neurodivergent brain, that's, let's say, an 8-lane highway. That's amazing because we occupy all of that 8 lanes while we're hyper focusing on something we love to do. And it drives the dopamine, which for personally am an ADHDer. Our brain is so dopamine depleted that catching that hit actually gets us to serotonin stability. And we're also finally good at something. So the classic educational environment was never adapted for neurodivergent out-of-the-box thinking, right? And there's a lot of adults that grew up undiagnosed. A lot of us are getting diagnosed post-40, post-50 even, which creates a completely different experience of grief and redefining your own identity, right? The moment when it finally clicks and you're like, I haven't been crazy for all this time, right? So all of a sudden we get the opportunity to actually understand something better and work with something better than most of the other people do. And that drives a relentless motivation. And also we're notorious for not having good sleeping habits, for hyper focusing, for a lot of other bad characteristics that need to be trained to kind of limit ourselves for it to be sustainable. But that's why you have the biggest breakthroughs by people on the spectrum.
I've read it on Reddit that there was a comment and someone said, finally, I can express myself with the efficient speed, with the speed that goes on in my brain. I can finally, the tools are catching up to my brain. Yeah. Some time ago, I mean, I also, in February, I also went into a burnout, and I sought help from a psychiatrist, and we found out something. I was really obsessed with movies and with screens. And he said that that's the form of escapism. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, now you are in Disneyland because you have images and you have videos that you can watch indefinitely, and you can create them, and you can do whatever you want to do. You can create your own content. So the question is, do you think a lot of people are using AI, well, the work itself for escapism and not knowing it?
I think yes. But I also think it's connected to the pursuit of that external validation that we spoke of before, right? So that frantic work, that pursuit of new tools is kind of like the ultimate superficial distraction and like a way to perform tasks just to avoid stopping and doing the work, to confront the void and kind of look at your own fear of being irrelevant and addressing it the way I've described earlier, right? So it's the purpose of doing by not achieving anything. It's definitely a distraction. It's definitely a form of escapism. It's definitely happening more or less on autopilot. And that's why taking a break is even scarier. Because maybe you feel that stuff will come out and you don't want to face them, or you don't have the capacity to, or you're wearing this shame shield and you're not as brave as you were to visit a psychiatrist or get help in any other way. Sometimes just opening up to other people or talking to your friends will have the same beneficial effect. But talking about your own fears and your own flaws is something that was kind of like programmed within us, that it's a big no-no. Of course, there's cultural specifics here, and I won't go into my own Slavic bias, which is extreme when it comes to this, I believe. But carrying your flaws on your sleeve is not generally something we tend to adopt naturally as human beings.
Why not?
Survival. If you show your weakest point, you're an open target. So it's kind of like a primordial thing as well. And then it's been solidified further by cultural norms and parenting styles and expectations and so on. Yeah.
Especially in Latin and Slavic cultures. Yeah.
Yep. You never show your feelings. You never show you're bad at something. You just overperform until you
Burnout.
drop off this earth. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of people that I'm talking to, and a lot of AI artists, a lot of technical artists, they come from different walks of life. They weren't artists their whole lives, but they found themselves being artists by using tools, by thinking creatively and expressing themselves with different media.
Mm-hmm.
And what's common to most of them, I actually don't know any of them without this, but we all have something called imposter syndrome. How do we deal with this? How do we tell ourselves, I belong here, I am worth of this?
I think it's connected to what we touched up on at the beginning. So the panic learning trap, right? Feeling like there's this level of external validation that will by default make you feel like you're ready and worthy to take a seat at the table. And dismantling it will start with identifying it, okay? So giving it an identity and a place on your shoulder, right? That's first. Second, trying to really reframe the way you work when that happens, and just taking a push away from your desk, for example, and having that inner monologue with you for a minute. That's a great first step. And then also just creating further, even if it's there and you feel the weight of it here, at least you've managed to navigate how to quiet it down.
And
But imposter syndrome always comes, there's a great research done. The more your intellect is, the higher your intellect, the wider your perspective, the more you doubt things, right? So the more you learn, the more you doubt in your own abilities, which is a sad irony humanity faces. That's why we say ignorance is bliss, because we're then convinced we know everything. And we kind of form and shape ideas and conventions by which we abide by, and they kind of work as guardrails for our lives. And we create this fake illusion that we're on the right path. But the right path and that idea is fundamentally flawed, because I love the principle of stop motion. The right path is only when you stop for that moment, but inevitably you need to set yourself in motion. You need to take that next step, right? One foot ahead of the other. And when you're moving, you can see that the right path suddenly shifts, changes, and those are just what we decide. Then there's a whole layer of life that all of a sudden pulls the rug from under you and forces you to kind of walk on a completely different terrain all of a sudden.
and it helps for a while because you fall on the hard ground. You know, you start trusting yourself. But people, someone once said that we have this kind of a saying in Slovenia: donkey goes on the ice just one time, but people creates ice. What's the word? Where you ice skate.
The ice rink?
The ice rink, yeah.
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 What were you trying to say?
That we tend to repeat our mistakes, that even when we fall down, even when we face the reality, we tend to go back. And
comfort.
Yes, exactly. Comfort.
Mm-hmm.
Comfort zone, yeah.
By design and by nature, we are hedonistic creatures, right? And if you can reach that plane of just self-acknowledgement, I won't say self-awareness, because there's a big part of subconscious that we just can't reach, no matter how much metacognition you have and you're able to hear your thoughts in the moment and pick up on your failed trails. If you're able to just accept that and take that as part of your reality, it becomes much more easier to see yourself as a pursuer of comfort, and then discern when you're willing to sacrifice that comfort, that immediate comfort, for a long-term gain, right? I like this philosophy. Goggins is an insane author. He made 2 books that really resonated with me, and he talks about optimizing your productivity. He focuses more on the physical plane of things, right? But he talks about having this governor in your head. And to put it plastically, like, our roads, our asphalt roads, are made for much more than the speed limit that we drive on them, right? The speed limit is there for different purposes. But if you eliminate other people, other cars, trees, buildings on the way, is that asphalt road able to sustain you driving double that speed? Of course it is. So when we do something challenging, either physical or mental, the governor in our head will constantly be, kind of waving that red flag. Hey, you got to stick to the limits because that's comfortable. And finding that balance again is difficult. I'm on the verge of running the governor over and over again until I'm burnt out and exhausted. That's also not the key to solving your problems, right? So it's a constant fine-tuning process, and for that we really need to just listen to ourselves and be in touch with ourselves. There's also a lot of people that I work with that have this misconceived idea that landing a job in a world-renowned studio or production house is something that they want, and they end up there. Again, that's not an issue. Getting there is not an issue. Sustaining it and then admitting to yourself that this is not something that you want to sustain, that you want to continue doing, without putting a shame label on it. And I don't want to be the one who quit that big studio job just because I didn't feel comfortable. That's the hurdle that each of us has to face on our own. And there's no one size fits all solution to it.
There's one thing that I want to talk about that you keep mentioning in your Substack articles. It's ritualized bullshit. What's that can you explain the concept, and how does someone even recognize that they're doing that?
Before I go and answer my thing, how did you understand it?
Well, the things that we are talking about, and everybody agrees, and nobody knows what is being talked about. And people are actually putting value to it.
Yeah. I'll start with a very low level example, right? Again, this is very, very culturally conditioned, so it might vary, but you run into a person that you know and they tell you to say hello to your partner or to your kid, or because that's the polite thing to do, right?
But you never
But,
do it.
my autistic brain will go into that literally, and then I come home and I say, hey, that and that person told me to say hello. And then what does that person do with it? Oh, great. There's no intrinsic value. There's no, of course, it depends on the person, but I'm talking about a situation where you're not in close connection with that person. It's just somebody you know, or somebody you might have worked with, let's say 10 years ago. And it's great that they still recall that you have a husband with this and this name, for example, but that's all there is. It's a ritualized bullshit, right? Personally, I would much rather have them take 2 more minutes and really talk to me and stop and go in depth instead of checking out all of the polite boxes and, rushing ahead. So I'd say the ritualized bullshit is basically just doing the activity itself and not focusing on the feeling it leaves. So a sense of you performing a task just to feel safe rather than to actually be moving forward into the direction that you want, into your meaningful intent, right? So you can do a short litmus test on your own and just ask yourself this question. So does this action move me toward presence or pushing me deeper into performing? Because if it's performance, it's bullshit.
Now I have a bit of uncomfortable question for you. Do you think the AI industry is structurally opposed to sovereignty?
I think currently we can see both ends of that. The bigger kahunas are definitely opposed it, yeah, and we can see that in the major layoffs and the idea of getting to a platform that will substitute a bunch of people. But there's also smaller studios that are empowering their creatives and giving them the shelter, which is also what I talk about. So creating a shelter in a team where mistakes are welcomed, embraced, and buffered, and encouraging them to actually go and experiment because of the value they'll bring back into that small boutique studio, for example. So currently, most of the players are still extorting the fact that the industry operates on the principle of limitless scale and speed, whereas sovereignty is focused on the human capacity limits. It's the same thing as if we would expect a flower to bloom every day of the year. We embrace the fact that it doesn't. We're happy for the times when, it starts blooming. But currently, I don't think we're there yet. Because if you say, I've hit a capacity limit without that threatening your job, systems see that that's slowing it down, right? Instead of seeing that it's increasing the quality of their pace. They're sprinting at a marathon. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, sprinting at a marathon, but we are getting bionic legs. And we are expected to finish marathon sprinting with those bionic legs. But when we do that, other limbs are hurting.
I'd say the bionic legs haven't been perfected enough yet, so we keep on breaking them, and we end up costing the manufacturers a lot of money because they have to be replaced all of the time.
So, what does AI replace inside a person? What do we quietly give up when we outsource more and more of our thinking and creativity?
That human grit, that human agency. I wouldn't say that's a general experience, but most of the people that are just dabbling with it now are basically, yeah, it's making them give up their human agency, so that friction to create new depth and meaning, right? That conflict, that emotional whirlwind that you experience as a human. As I said before, awesome fight scenes can be recreated, but how can I relate to it when I've seen 50 of them in a day? What part of my humanity does it resonate with, And the more we outsource the doing, the more we risk outsourcing the being. It's kind of like allowing the system to define our rhythm and purpose, and then being weirded out by the fact that we can't keep up the pace. It's kind of like a codependent relationship with another human being. If you let go of your wheel and expect somebody else to drive exactly the way you want it, it's not going to end up well.
That's a great example. Yeah. Last couple of questions. Did the mental health of the AI creative community actually got worse as the tools got better?
Worse than compared to
before, yes.
I think it's a difficult comparison to be made because I don't think we were talking about mental health before. there were discussions about, kind of affecting body image and creating body dysmorphia by constant photoshopping and filtering and stuff like that. But I don't think it became such a big of a question until our humanity was put at risk, which is on the one hand really great, because we should have been having these kinds of discussions even before, 20 years ago. But I think mental health started to become a discussion, yes, because of the speed, but also because our humanity was put at stake, you know? And in a sense, maybe I could say yes, because like tools got better, and the example that you gave. So masterpieces are now within reach to people that haven't even trained for it, right? But at the same time, the standard also shifted from being in awe to polishing and perfecting and creating that emotional pressure, I'd say. Because like initially nobody really cared about the quality because the tools were still kind of rudimentary, right? But then professionalizing it and now going into enterprise adoption is really reactivating our sense of purpose and the worth wound, right? Again, professional lives make up of 60 to 70% of any adult's identity. That's huge. Also, just look at your time dispersal. There's a significant time investment that you have with your professional life, more so than with any other human being. In capitalism, that's unfortunately the nature of the game. You spend more time with your work than you do with any other human being. And I think that's a sentence we all need to hear out loud from time to time.
Is that a healthy return of investment?
Not necessarily, but it's a system that we can't really fight against, right? Yes, there's self-sustainable people. Yes, there are alternative professions that allow some people freedom, but working within hypercapitalism, 48-hour week is a dream. Now we're looking at 50 to 60-hour weeks, right?
Okay, Masha, one last question before we say
Mm-hmm.
goodbye. And this is about you. I want to ask you directly. What's one thing that AI space taught you about yourself that you were uncomfortable or didn't want to learn?
That I'm capable of doing it. I'm a dyslexic, autistic, ADHD person that's been navigating a bunch of different professions so far. From entrepreneuring was always the spine of what I did. But there was always this black hole that grew and grew and grew. So either it was content creation, proofreading tools, or just having that agency, which became reinforced since I started using AI tools, because maybe I'm not able to spell it right, but I'm able to read it right, for example. That's a simple example that I can give, right? And I'm able to interact with a tool in a way that helps me circumvent those gaps efficiently and successfully. And also just allowing my brain to create output at the speed of my thoughts, and then sifting through what I end up creating and gaining and building confidence that way, right? So I had a completely different experience here. Adopting AI actually helped me to slow down because I wasn't constantly trying to fit myself, stretch myself over all of these different molds that I just couldn't fit in, right? All of a sudden, I found 3 tools that fit me perfectly, that fit my paintbrush roll perfectly. And it not only motivated me, but it boosted my output.
So you practically dropped your clutches, sat in a Mustang Shelby, and drove off into a sunset.
A gorgeous sunset, exactly.
All right, Masha, thank you so much. This was an
You're
utter
welcome.
pleasure. This was very, very interesting. I learned a lot. I hope that my audience also learned something about themselves, something that resonated, and most of all, take care of yourself. This is not a sprint, this is a marathon. And our bionic legs aren't there yet. Please check out our website, Lighthouse Academy. We have our courses starting next week, AI for Creative Leaders. It's already full, so definitely check out the waitlist. If you are not on waitlist, but if you've already did the pre-call and you need to finish the process, you can still do that. But other than that, check out our next cohorts. They will start in September, I think. Yeah, we do have a seat or two on Advanced Comfy. And we're starting the next batch of Figma Weave live sessions. And coming soon, AI filmmaking live sessions, which will be led by Jan Willemblom. And we will have a couple of great guest mentors. And the big finale is the judge panel, which we cannot release the names yet, but it's going to be a very, very awesome surprise. So again, check out lighthouseacademy.ai and find something for yourself. Masha, thank you again. It was a
Thank you
pleasure.
too.
Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye.